Welcome back to another episode of Transformation Talks. I'm your host, Sam Forget, and today we'll be joined by Micheala Stommes, an online fitness and nutrition coach and the founder of MBody Movement. Micheala helps women build strength, confidence, and sustainable habits through evidence-based training and nutrition, avoiding extremes and quick fixes. She also recently became a mom to a 1-year-old, an experience that has deepened her commitment to helping women navigate fitness through every season of life, including pregnancy, postpartum, and beyond. Micheala, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Of course. I think we should dive right into how becoming a mom has changed your approach to fitness. And I'd be curious how it has evolved the early days. He just turned 1, right? Your son is 1 now?
Yes, you did. Yep.
Okay. So I'm curious, yeah, just early days, how you had to shift things, how it's evolved over the last year. Is it what you expected prior to becoming a mom? Were there any surprises? I'd love to hear more about that.
I think if there's any moms listening to this, they can relate to the fact that you get like amnesia a little bit, where the tough times you downplay it once you're further enough from it. I had a really tough pregnancy. That was like the rough time for me. I know a lot of women struggle postpartum, and we can get into this, but for me, it was pregnancy that was so incredibly hard. I was sick the whole time, and mentally, it took a huge toll on me. And it was a dark time. It was supposed to be something that was like really exciting, and it was. I was so grateful to be pregnant, but it was not what I had expected. You see like, oh, you're glowing. I was never glowing. I was always just, it was a dark time. So I think that that really shaped my perspective postpartum, because I was just so grateful for to be healthy, to not feel sick every single day. And I knew that I was actually in control of how I was going to feel, and that wasn't the case when I was pregnant. You just feel hungover every day of your life is really what it felt like. And postpartum, there were so many hard things, and I don't want to downplay that, because every season has its own version of hard, and that's kind of what I've learned, and what I've always told myself throughout this past year of motherhood is that, um, you know, nothing is forever. Everything is temporary. And so even the good moments, the bad moments, they're all temporary. And that helped me a little bit, but really just focusing on being present with what can I do right now. And I'm so fortunate because I came into motherhood with a really strong foundation. I have a really messed up relationship with food, the scale, my body, and my past. And luckily, that is the past for me. And I've spent many, many years working on that and getting to a place where I just have a much healthier relationship with all of this stuff. And so to be in the position that I was going into one of the hardest seasons of life, I believe, it really it gave me a leg up almost. It was like the things that are really hard for women, they didn't feel as hard for me, because it was already part of my norm, how I eat, and making myself a priority. This is what women struggle with the most, because you have this little baby that needs everything from you. And so you give everything that you have, but you don't realize that like you can't pour from an empty cup. And so for me, I've never battled with feeling selfish for taking time for myself. I know that some women can't relate to that, but I don't, because I just talked about this the other day on social media, and it resonated with a lot of people. But I said, someday our kids grow up and they become, adults of their own, and then they're going to have kids. And what do we want them to take away from how we show up for ourselves? Like, do we want them to continue to take care of themselves, or do we want them to completely just deplete themselves by giving, 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 and not pouring back to themselves? So I think about that a lot, and everything that I do and showing up every day for myself is for my son. It's so that I can be the best version of myself for him, because there have been days where I didn't prioritize myself first, and those were my worst mental health days. Those were the days that I just had the hardest time. And yeah, so, I haven't been perfect, but I have always kept that top of mind, that I'm a better me and I can be a better mom when I do those little things for myself.
Yeah, and I just so many great points there. And one thing that I want to highlight is how you mentioned that you do the best you can each day based on what you have available to give. And that will obviously ebb and flow. And obviously this applies to new parents. This applies to busy professionals. This applies to people with any level of demands in their life, where I think so many people, when they think about being consistent, it's with like the same metric of success every day, hitting certain targets, certain steps, lifting certain weights, doing certain things. But to me, a better metric of success, or consistency, I should say, is one that is at least somewhat fluid, that evolves, throughout the week, each month, in your case, over the last year or so. Because I bet what was a win for you month one is very different than you recently competing in high rocks. You know what I mean? Like that's
Hmm.
a very different thing. So I love that you highlighted that, how your metric is more, well, what do I have to give today based on the demands of today?
I think people really underestimate that whole aspect too because they downplay the power of the really simple habits. On day one of coming home from the hospital, I'm like, what is moving my body going to look like right now for me? I know that movement remains a priority, but I had a C-section. I wasn't going to start working out right away. Like it was going to look different. Even walking, I couldn't walk for very long, but my mom and I would go out and we'd do like just a little loop and it would be like maybe 5 minutes and then we'd come in. And it just felt really good because I was doing something and checking a box there. And I think a lot of people fall into the trap of a 5 minute walk, that's not going to do anything for me. I'll wait until I can go out and get my hour walk in. And you don't realize that that's how you keep the momentum going. It's like thinking, what do I have the capacity for right now? And then setting your expectations based off of that. And then you never let yourself down. I have people that I think my message is received in a very positive light from most people, but social media. And there's always people that get really mad at me when I talk about my journey with motherhood because and I know why. It's because they are literally comparing what they have the capacity for what I do. And we might even be in different seasons of motherhood and honestly have different like values and what we care about. I wouldn't recommend every mom go out and train for high rocks. That's just something that I've done because I enjoy it. And then people look at what I'm doing for exercise and they're like, well, that's not realistic. And it's like, for who? Why are you basing it off of what I do. And so that's the other thing too is like making sure that you keep your blinders on and like focus on what is most important to you. Like there's a difference between it's not just my high rocks journey even is like I'm pushing myself further, but like that this goes beyond just like healthy habits and behaviors, but not everyone has to do that.
Yeah, no, I think that's another very important clarification. You also mentioned how you don't really wrestle with the guilt that a lot of parents do for taking care of yourself, because it's an amplifier for all the ways that you want to show up for yourself, for your son, for your partner, for your entire family, friends, everybody. And even as a non-parent, that resonates with me a lot because of what I saw my parents do when I was growing up, because of the standards they had for themselves, because of the way that my mom would take the time to cook almost entirely homemade meals. We didn't really eat out a lot. The food environment is really solid. That was a focal point. My dad is this big meathead, so I'd always see him make sure that he did not negotiate that exercise time. But as the kid then, I didn't look at it as like, oh, my parents are taking too much time away from me. I saw it as, oh, okay, I guess this is what people do. This is how people take care of themselves. And obviously, it played an enormous role into how I take care of myself now, because what I saw as normal, just again, environment, such a big predictor of behavior. I saw it as normal. I followed their lead. Now it became a career path as well. But yeah, I actually think in many ways it can be selfless, of like leading by example and doing something that your kids can eventually follow. So I think that's another good reframe for people as well, of like, hey, if you want to be the best self, you're try that again. If you want to be your best self for your family, spending at least some time on this stuff is the way to do it.
Absolutely. My husband and I have talked about that so many times because neither of us grew up with that environment necessarily and so or like that modeled for us and so we're like how cool is it that our son Jackson is going to grow up and this is just going to be the norm for him. He spends like a lot, not anymore now, but in the early days he spent a lot of mornings with me down in our gym and it's just we do what we have to do, but to your point it's like it's just this is what we do.
Yeah. So speaking of him being down in the gym with you, how have you actually adjusted your workout? So beyond the initial phases after you brought him home, when it was more about kind of general recovery, when you were able to reintroduce a level of intensity, like was it your frequency that changed at all? Exercise selection, like how did you adjust things and how might you continue to make those adjustments? Not just for the physical considerations, but just in terms of like being a mom to a 3 month old and a 6 month old. Now he's over a year. Like, how has that actually shifted?
Yeah, there's been a lot of shifts. So I was home with my son for the first year. We just actually put him into daycare at the year mark. And we have had help. We've had a nanny come 3 times a week, and she was here for a couple hours a day, which was very helpful for me to have dedicated work time. But I felt guilt actually using that work time for my workout. So I really tried to like get up early or do what I could to get my workouts in, or even, get my workout in while wrangling him so that that time could be dedicated to just work. And so I just had to let a lot of expectations go of what my workout was going to look like. And this goes back to what we were just talking about of like celebrating any win. And so in the early days, it was tough for me because my workouts are my time. And I was excited to get back to moving my body and getting in those strength workouts. And it did not always look the way I wanted it to. Sometimes it was 15 minutes because I had a fussy baby that would not sit still. And other times I could get in my full 40-minute workout. And so I always just reminded myself that everything counts. Every little bit of it counts. And in the early days, it didn't feel like I was doing much at all. But looking back, it allowed me to, at month 5, 6, 7, 8, excel because I didn't just say, oh, I only have 10 minutes today, or I only have 20 minutes. I'm not going to do anything at all. So even if it was just 2 hard sets that I was going to get in of a couple of things, that's what I did that day. And I've really fallen in love with running this past year. And part of that was with my goal of high rocks, and you have to run. And so, but a big part of that was Jackson has always loved being outside and being in the stroller. And so when we would be downstairs getting our strength workout in, if it was just like not a good day for that, I'd do what I could, and then I'd put him in the stroller and we'd go out and get a run in. And I just did what I could. And a lot of times that's what it was. So then I kind of, in the beginning, when it was really hard, I reduced my expectation of how many days I'm going to strength train. So it was like 2, maybe 3 days a week, which looked very different from pre-pregnant me, but wasn't my ideal of what I wanted to work up to either. 4 days is kind of my sweet spot. But it worked, and it carried that momentum. So then eventually every few months things got a little bit more consistent and predictable, I'd say, but then you always have like this roller coaster of surprise, but you would get a little bit more consistency. I also have a very supportive husband who, always made sure that has asked me this entire past year, like, what can I do to help? And sometimes it's him going into work, like he would go into work an hour later so that I could get my uninterrupted workout in, or he'd come home a little early, or the weekends. And so that was really helpful too, is just kind of maximizing those pockets of the day that would be best for my workout. But a lot of times it was doing it when I didn't want to. There was a lot of like 4 p.m. workouts, and pre-pregnant me would never. But, postpartum me learned like it's this or never, and never is not an option. So you just roll with the punches and do what you can.
Yeah. And I think so many people drastically underestimate the effectiveness of a moderately intense plan or even not very intense plan done extremely consistently compared to making, again, that metric of success, that expectation for yourself of, well, I have to be on a 4 to 5 day per week program. Otherwise, what's the point? So if we come in and suggest something like 2 days per week, at least temporarily, to most people, that doesn't sound like a whole lot. You don't typically see 2 days per week advocated for. Where if you look at most people's like net workouts per month, they're doing great if they're averaging 2 to 3 sessions per week. If you're not like super hardcore into fitness, if you're at 2 to 3 sessions a week, that's great. So if we can, again, adjust expectations of self and say, hey, 2 to 3 days per week. And I always add too, if you don't feel like that's enough, almost prove it in a way. Nail this, knock this out of the park for the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks or so. If after that we still feel like we want to add more, we can entertain it. But like I said, I think most people underestimate how effective a plan like that can be when you're very consistent with it. So maybe 6 to 8 weeks goes by and you feel like, actually, I don't think I necessarily need to add more. I'm seeing great results from this. It's allowed me to be very consistent. So I'm just going to sit tight here. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's funny because as you were talking, I was thinking about how my 4 days a week of strength training used to be my sweet spot before I had Jackson. And now I strength train 3 times a week. And it pairs with, my high rocks training and the running and whatnot. But yeah, it's just, it changes. And my capacity in those early days, 2 days a week was a huge win for me. I also think about having a baby is a lot. So the ramp up needs to be slow and steady. And a lot of women, part of it is just like you're excited to get back to it and do things for you and feel good in your body again. And they just go a little too hard. And then what happens anytime anybody goes too hard? You lose steam and then you don't stick with it. So I think that slow and steady approach, and like you said, almost thinking about like, what can I do on my worst week? What about when I'm getting no sleep and the baby, all the things are happening? What can I commit to? That should be your goal. And then anything else is a cherry on top.
100%. And I found that most people create the plans, like start thinking about these plans for themselves when they're at their most motivated. So, of course, when somebody reaches out to us, maybe they've had a bit of a low moment, and enough is enough type moment. I'm going to be gung ho. Starting tomorrow, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And that's great that you're this motivated right now as you're putting together a plan. But I want to fast forward a few weeks when inevitably your motivation, energy, bandwidth, stress, ebbs and flows. So let's look at, to your point, Micheala, the most tired, most stressed, most fried, that 4 p.m. version of you. And I want to create the plan with that version of you in mind. Because if we make that like what we're going for, again, much more consistent. And obviously that ends up being the secret sauce. What I'm curious about is how your nutrition has evolved just with all of the demands and your time and energy. Have you adjusted your approach, any of your go-to meals, maybe things that you did pre-pregnancy versus now? What has the nutrition looked like?
Yep, that has definitely evolved over time as well in terms of like how much energy I'm putting towards it. And so in the early days, I really was just focused on balanced meals, putting protein on my plate and like adding in a veggie when I can. I eat very, very simple. I add a protein, I add a carb, I have some vegetables. And so my approach to nutrition worked really well in a busy season for me because I'm not a recipe person and I don't dedicate a whole lot of time to cooking. So I just kind of continued doing that. I did a little bit of prep. I would do things like overnight oats and things that I could prep a couple in advance. The biggest thing in the early days is you're constantly, if you're breastfeeding, you're feeding, you're doing this, you're doing that, everything for your baby. It's like you're either feeding them or changing them, I swear, like every second. And so I don't know, before I became a mom, I'm like, oh, they just sleep all day. But somehow, like, your day is just so incredibly busy with them. And so you do feel like you don't have time to eat, but that has never been an option for me. And so I like, again, this goes back to my strong foundation and my values and all of that around nutrition is like I have put my nutrition to be just as much of a priority, but how my approach to it has looked different in those expectations. So, I wasn't tracking in the early days. My nutrition didn't look perfect and there was a lot of snacking here and there and things that, I don't normally do when I'm on my A game, but it was fine. I let go of like all of this pressure for it to be perfect or look exactly like I wanted it to. And it was more just about, can you eat some balanced meals throughout the day to make sure that you have enough to keep your supply up, to keep your energy up, and to just not be completely ravenous? Because in those early days when you're not sleeping and you're breastfeeding, your energy needs go up. Like it's a recipe for just being this ravenous snacking machine. And that's what a lot of women always ask me is like, how do I control my appetite? And it's going to come from staying hydrated and making sure that you are eating enough and focusing on protein and fiber. So I was still doing those things, but again, it wasn't perfect. But at the 6 to 8 week mark, I think it was, I had started to feel like I was I was just feeling like I had a little bit more capacity. And so that was when I set a step goal for myself and I decided to start tracking. So I kind of wanted to bring some data into what was going on. And I had no goal of like, I have to hit this many calories. I simply just wanted to see what was going on. And then from there, I did that for about 2 weeks, just used my tracking app as like a food diary, got an average and realized like, okay, I feel pretty good here. And so that was kind of my target and that was what I was aiming for. And it just allowed me to have a little bit more um, intentionality with how I was planning and fueling my body. And I just you want to feel good postpartum. And when you are nailing your nutrition, you feel really good. So it was like my body didn't necessarily look the way that I wanted it to at 6, 8, 12 weeks postpartum, but I was feeling good on the inside because I was fueling it properly. And yeah, I tracked for a couple of months and then I actually stopped tracking and I just leaned on the habits and behaviors and the structure that I've built with nutrition. And that's kind of what I've been doing since.
I think that is such a good way to go about tracking for so many people, just coming at it from like an awareness generating approach. Let me just do a pulse check and see where I'm at. Because I know we've both seen so many people that tracking in their head is exclusively a weight loss tool. I break out my fitness pal, I break out chronometer, whatever, when I want to reduce my calories to lose weight as quickly as possible, and not looking at all the other utility of, well, can I reframe this a bit and ask, am I eating enough for my goals? Am I eating enough to be well fueled throughout the day, higher energy levels, better cognitive function? Whatever the workouts or activities are today, I want to feel better for those. I want to recover well. There's so much other upside that's not just, well, how can I manipulate the way my body looks? And obviously, tracking is a powerful tool for body comp stuff, but I love how when you reintroduced it, it was more of a, let me just see where I'm at. Let me make sure I'm having enough. And similar to the workout stuff we've talked about, I think when we can reduce friction or kind of change the metric of success for what tracking has to be, it doesn't always have to be weight loss focused, perfectly precise. It can just be more of a pulse check thing to see what I can add to my day. Then it gets a lot more appealing, a lot more enjoyable, and a lot more sustainable. And then maybe over time it evolves, you get more precise, maybe add some targets for a little while. But I think that's almost like new to a lot of people of like, oh, I can track for something other than a weight loss specific goal.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. I'm huge on that. With all of the women that we work with, we have a mandatory pre-diet phase and all of them just start tracking at their perceived maintenance intake. And I swear it does wonders because to your point, so many people only know of their relationship with tracking when they are restricting. And that creates a poor relationship with it right there. But when you can come at it from just a curiosity standpoint and there's no judgment and you're just truly learning like how do I fuel my body best and what does that look like? It just brings so much awareness to it and it does help you make better choices overall, but it's so much more than just a weight loss tool.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I actually have the same phase in my program where prior to us doing any sort of calorie reduction, let's get a better feel for what your maintenance is. Let's see what you're already doing well. Cool. How can we keep doing that? Is there anything we need to clean up a little bit? So, yeah, just that data collection at first to get a feel for where you're at. And I think a really, really important piece of information that most people are lacking going into any sort of nutritional protocol is where their maintenance actually is. Because it's either not tracking, semi winging it, or totally winging it, or tracking with a very low calorie total in mind, and we don't actually know. I mean, calculations might get us in the ballpark, but we don't know with a relative degree of certainty where's your maintenance. And there's so much value to that. One, we can see where eventually you'll end up needing to be in terms of portions on your plate. Like, what's it going to take for you to maintain? Obviously, more food on your plate is more opportunity to get more nutrients, more energy, better performance. So we have that. And then I think for a lot of people, it might be, oh, you don't have to diet on as low of calories as you thought. You're actually maintaining quite well on, I don't know, 1900. So maybe we drop you to 1400 and you don't have to go to 1000 to 1200 or whatever you think you do. So it's such a great piece of information to start with is let me get a feel for where I currently am, what it's going to take for me to maintain. And then from there, you can go off in so many different directions but from a like you're better equipped to do it. You're starting from a much stronger place. So I love that you have that first phase.
Yeah, I think too, what somebody has been doing prior to whatever your goal is, maybe you have a weight loss goal, but if you haven't been tracking at all, it doesn't matter necessarily what the calculator tells you your maintenance is. What if you've been significantly over that? You have to take all of that into consideration. And so if you've been eating, on average 2,600 calories, and then you're just trying to jump to this random number that MyFitnessPal gave you, like it's a complete 180. And I always say, like, even dieting, like when you have body composition goals and you decide to diet, it shouldn't feel that hard and miserable. I think we all have this in our mind because we've all done, like, well, a lot of us have done these really aggressive approaches and fad diets and all of the things. And so we think if it's not grueling, then it must not be working. And it doesn't actually have to be that way. And if you do the hard work, the hardest work, I believe, is everything that is in the pre-diet phase that sets you up for success so that when you go into the diet phase, the only thing that really changes is the amount of food on your plate. You've already have a lot of, you know, um, these foundational habits and behaviors set, and you know how to make decisions, because maintenance still requires work too. And people are either not paying attention to anything or they're trying to diet, and there is no middle ground. And this is where, like, you have to live. This is where your sustainable results come from. And yeah, that's the other big thing that we really highlight with the women we work with, is like, what's your game plan for afterwards? If you don't master this stuff before you diet, you can have the best diet phase, but you're probably not going to maintain it long term.
Oh my God, this is so funny. You mentioned the expectation of most people of like, all right, I'm dieting now. It's going to be grueling, all fun, all enjoyment, satiation out the window. Like, I'm dieting now. And again, it's so funny because when I work with somebody and I put them through that kind of introductory phase, and then, okay, starting tomorrow, it's the dieting phase, I always have to offer so much reassurance that, hey, the only thing we're adjusting here is your calorie range. We're going to temporarily bring it down a moderate amount. Everything else that you've built so far stays the same. So calories are temporarily coming down. We have some sort of break or exit strategy in place. We're not just dieting into the abyss. Obviously, a greater emphasis maybe on things like hunger management, just making sure you're not suffering more than you need to. But that's really it. And then post diet, like you also said, Micheala, doesn't look that different than the dieting phase. You get more food on your plate. Maybe you're a bit more flexible with, data collection. You're not being as precise with stuff, but like none of these phases look drastically different than the other one. It's okay. Let's lay a strong foundation. We're going to tighten up your calorie intake a little bit temporarily. We have some sort of, some breaks built in and exit strategy in place. And then we phase back out, but it never strays too far from baseline at any point, which again, I think surprises a lot of people relative to what their expectation of dieting is.
Yeah. Well, and when we were talking about tracking, I think the same goes for tracking, your eating habits and the structure of your day and your choices. It shouldn't be that different whether you're putting it into your MyFitnessPal or you're not. And this is where a lot of people go wrong too, is they only make those quote unquote good choices, or their day looks a certain way only when they're tracking. And then when they're not tracking, it looks entirely different. So that's always a red flag too.
That's so true. And I think a really powerful motivator for people to continue making good decisions, not just based on numerical guardrails, is what you said a few minutes ago, where your focus was on how do I feel as good as possible? Because at the end of the day, there's only so much dieting that we can do. You can only get so lean, you can only diet so often. So if the only reason you're making good decisions is to see the scale go down and to, reach the lowest body fat percentage possible, again, like there's only so much we can do that. So I've always found that for most people, a more sustainable North Star, more sustainable motivator to keep making good decisions is like, how do these decisions make me feel, whether I'm tracking them or not? And then obviously, when you do that, your decisions end up in a much better place.
Yeah, I think pregnancy and the first year postpartum has really been such a pivotal time for me, because those are seasons of your life where you can't be, especially pregnancy, right? You're not focused on body composition changes. And even postpartum, I think that I've had a lot of success with improving my body composition because I was very methodical, if you will, with my approach. Like the first couple of months, even though I didn't love the way that my body looked, I knew that it was not time for me to diet. And there, I had moments where I'm like, oh, I feel uncomfortable. I want those fast results now, but I never acted on it because I knew that it was not the time. And if I wanted to be the most successful, I knew how I had to do it. And so I went into postpartum with a game plan and it served me well. But I think a lot of people get impatient and they just want these fast results, but it it either doesn't work, they don't get those results anyways, or maybe you get them but you can't stick with it. And so like I was saying with pregnancy, it really forced me like you have to show up every day and it's not about your body composition. You're working out, you can eat healthy and your body is it's changing, but probably not necessarily the way you want. You're growing a baby, your body is changing in all sorts of ways, but it does force you to look beyond that. And for many years, even as I've improved my relationship with food and my body and all of that, I still have been focused on body composition. And so for the couple of years leading up to getting pregnant, I was very focused on that. And my whole plan was around that. And so I did a lot of phases of, dieting and maintenance. And then you get pregnant and it's like, okay, it shifts. Like now, what is the purpose? Why are you showing up every day? And a lot of people struggle in maintenance because they're not getting these external results, the fast results that they want. So they're like, well, how do you stick with it? Because I'm not seeing the scale go down anymore. I'm not seeing my body change every couple of weeks. And you have to look for progress beyond that and going by how you feel. And that was my biggest motivator. When I was pregnant, it was like, oh my gosh, I feel terrible, but I can't imagine how much worse I would feel if I wasn't taking care of my body, if I wasn't moving it, and if I wasn't fueling it the best that I could.
Sure. So funny enough, I was actually starting to write a post this morning about how I think maintenance is, I don't want to say like a misleading term. That's not the right word. Again, I'm still working on the post, so I'll come up with a better word for it. But I was thinking about exactly what you just said, Micheala, how when you say maintenance to most people, they just think of like, okay, it's this idle phase where nothing is happening. When maintenance just refers to your calorie range, we're pulling you out of a deficit and bringing you up to your maintenance range, loose maintenance of body comp as well, generally speaking. But again, we're maintenance, it's just calories. That doesn't mean other forms of progress won't be happening, getting stronger, even developing muscle, improving digestion, improving energy levels, improving all these other things. So again, we're saying maintenance. And again, I don't think a misleading term is the right word for it. I'll come up with something better, but I think it's go ahead. It sounds like you have an idea.
No, I know what you're saying because yes, it's like all my progress is going to stall now. And
Mm-hmm.
that couldn't be further from the truth. I actually think that the most progress, the most obviously the fastest visible external progress is going to come from a diet phase, of course. But I think about the work that's done in maintenance and that's the most important work that you could possibly do to everything that you said. And then even just being more confident in navigating like the hardest things that people struggle with, social situations, going on vacation, like all of these things that is a part of life. And people love dieting because it creates you know, these strong like guardrails and perimeters and it's black and white, do this, don't do that. And then when those guardrails come off and you're in maintenance and there's a lot more gray area, people don't actually know how to navigate maintenance. It's either they're dieting or they've really let up on everything. And so if you are truly maintaining, there's a lot of progress that comes from that phase. But people don't see that because they don't actually maintain. They're either like, upwards of surplus and just like really loosey goosey, or they're tighten all the reins and I'm dieting.
So true. And that's why, to me, I think for a lot of people, the most valuable time to be working with a coach is actually post diet,
Yep.
when you are very often choosing maintenance as the desired outcome, maybe for the first time or one of the first times in your life. And so in my program, I have a post dieting. So there's the prep phase, the dieting phase. And then to me, the most important phase is actually the post diet one. Perhaps unsurprisingly, that tends to be the one that people at least initially value the least. They get their fat loss results and it's like, okay, I'm good. I'm like, you've been good so many times in your life before. This is the part that we really need to stick. And I do think it starts with that reframe of what maintenance is. This is not idle. We're not on our heels of just don't gain fat back, don't gain fat back. Yes, again, mostly maintaining your body comp is that can be a goal, that's fine. But also, you mentioned how adding more food to your plate creates so many opportunities for us to progress in other ways, your ability to handle social situations, just kind of live in the middle for once. Never mind all the physiological upside to adding food back to your plate. So yeah, I have this post dieting phase that I want people to go through, but to be honest, that's the one where people are most it's most likely where somebody's going to jump ship around there prematurely. And the irony of that is like maintenance is where most people should spend a lot of their life, but it's also the thing that people tend to put the least time and effort into practicing, which is such a bummer. But when people do, of course, that completely changes things.
Yeah, I agree. 100%.
Micheala, you mentioned navigating vacations a few minutes ago, and I know you just got back from a vacation. And something that caught my eye was a post that you put up where you said, on your vacation, I ate whatever I want, but I came back feeling great. Which to most people, those two things don't go together. If I eat whatever I want, there's no way I'm feeling great after. So yeah, what did you mean by that? Can you walk people through what you did? Because I think the expectation of what a vacation is going to look like is not feeling, maybe you have some fun, but it's not feeling good after. So what did you do differently?
I'll start with this. I used to think that I couldn't fully enjoy myself and live in a body I was most proud of and loved the way that I looked and felt. Those two things couldn't coexist. It was like I have to have one or the other. I either get to have fun and really enjoy, and then I learned what enjoyment actually means. And enjoyment to me, like when I used to say, I just want to be able to enjoy myself tonight. I was eating to the point, we have used this phrase like eat like an a-hole, and I was doing that. And then afterwards, I felt terrible. There was nothing that was enjoyable about any of it. And that has been a huge light bulb moment for me because when we talk about maintenance and how it still works, it still requires effort. You think about just because I want something and something's there doesn't mean I always act on it. And I know some people might think of that and be like, "Oh, that's restrictive. You should be able to have whatever you want." Actually, that is kind of a toxic mindset because that puts you in this sabotaging cycle. We hear this a lot even in our group sometimes with the women that come in and they're like, "Well, I'm just going to eat whatever and do whatever I want this day and I won't feel bad about it because I should be able to enjoy myself and then I'll get back to it." And I think that that is such a tricky mindset and it really holds people back because it doesn't have to be that way. Like completely letting loose. Of course, we should all like let loose at times, right? On my vacation, I truly mean what I said. I ate what I wanted to. And yeah, I had all the yummy foods that I don't typically have every single day when I'm at home. There was nothing that I really wanted that I did not have at all. But that doesn't mean that I wasn't still, that I didn't practice restraint in certain situations. Every night, my husband and I got dessert, and the resort that we stayed at, we went to an all inclusive. So, food is everywhere at all times. And we were there for 8 days too. So that's a long time to have like unlimited food at your fingertips. And every night we got dessert, and they came out full desserts. We go to all inclusive resorts often, and normally the portions are a little smaller. So we'll order like multiple things on the menu. These were like full size desserts. So every night that I got a dessert, I ate half of it. And there were a lot of nights where I wanted to keep eating it because it tasted good, but I knew that half was good and that I knew I was going to have more the next night and the next night. And I knew that if I ate the full thing, I was probably going to go past that point of enjoyment. And so I share that because there was a lot of that on my trip and a lot of these decisions that I made in moments where there was slight discomfort, but in the long run, it made me the most comfortable. I felt so great all week. I loved the choices that I made. And my husband and I have been going on these trips for quite a few years now. And I remember the first couple of years in navigating them, it was entirely different. I used to come home and I felt just so heavy, so gross. Immediately feel like, what can I do to reverse this stuff? And what can I do to fast track myself towards feeling better? And I just don't feel like that anymore because I make choices that align with how I want to feel.
I think it is so great that you kind of challenge your own definition of what enjoyment is. Because, yeah, I think for most people, enjoyment is synonymous with completely unrestricted eating and drinking. But if we do factor in the feelings factor of, okay, when I do that, how am I feeling when I walk out of the restaurant? How am I feeling when I try to sleep that night? Probably not sleeping much at all, at least not super well. How do I feel when I wake up the next morning? I would actually argue that excess can actually, I don't want to say take away from a trip, but you were in a resort setting, but let's say, I don't know, you traveled to Rome or something like that, and you were not looking out for this point of diminishing returns. I would argue that, again, it could, again, I want to say take away from the trip, but impact it in some way where you're walking around, you feel super bloated, super lethargic, maybe less eager to, say, do a really nice hike that's slightly outside of the city. So there is that sweet spot that is not inherently restrictive. If anything, it adds to the enjoyment of the trip because the special things feel more special. It's more enjoyable. You don't feel like shit afterwards. So, yeah, I think that's a really good thing for us to highlight is what enjoyment actually looks like, because it's probably not, almost certainly not feeling awful after you have these things. And there is kind of that landing spot in the middle of excessively restrictive, but then no restraint whatsoever, which is, like I said, I think that's what people equate with enjoyment when it's really not it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
And something else that I had mentioned to you prior to us hitting record is how I love that. And I'm backtracking to the holidays here, where forgive me, I'm bouncing around a little. During the holidays, we obviously typically see the advice of it's just one day, it's just one holiday, do whatever you want and get back on track tomorrow, which I think is well intentioned advice because we don't want people, stressing having their aunt's, dessert that they bring every year. But like we're talking about here with, say, this vacation stuff, I think that can actually feed into the all or nothing cycle even more. So, I had mentioned, like I said, prior to us recording, how I love when I see you post content about that because I don't think a whole lot of people do it. I don't really see that on my feed, whether it is during the holidays, whether it's, the summer and people are talking about vacations. A lot of it is that huge emphasis on it's just a week, do whatever, your plan will be waiting for you. I'm like maybe not the greatest mindset for a lot of people to have who already struggle with extremes.
Yeah, the way I think about it is the choices that I make on a daily basis are because I want to feel my best. Why would I go on vacation for a week and be like, I'm on vacation. I don't need to do any of these things. I don't want to feel good. It's like that is definitely that fast track towards feeling like crap. And when you were talking about being on vacation and getting a couple of days in and just feeling it adds up quick. And we, on our most recent vacation, met so many people that had been there a few days and were already like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I have, this many more days to go. I don't know if I can do it because they're just eating and drinking, whatever. And I'm like, I totally resonate with that because that was me a couple of years prior. Like by the middle of the week, you're already just feeling so not good. And yeah, the whole thing about like it's just one day. Yes, it is always just one day. One day is never going to make or break your progress. However, it definitely feeds that all or nothing mentality because you go into a holiday just because you're putting mashed potatoes, your grandma's favorite pie, and whatever else on your plate, does that mean that you can't make any other great decisions? Does that mean that you can't still potentially stay within your calories for the day if that's a goal of yours? Like, you have to take ownership. And with every single day, I mean, we have so much more control than we like to believe. And holidays just get like hyped up so much because I think people they haven't spent enough time in maintenance and they haven't practiced flexibility enough. And so they immediately think of, oh my gosh, well, I might be a little more sedentary than usual today, or I'm going to eat more food than I usually do. I'm automatically going to be off track and I have to just say, screw it for the whole day. And I hate that because I think that you can come out of a holiday feeling so good and proud of yourself just by being intentional with certain things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Again, every time I see you post around the holidays, I'm like, yes, I wish way more people had this stuff on their feed.
I
Michaela,
know
one of the
you don't
last,
see it as
yeah,
much.
yeah, no, no. And again, I think it's well intentioned because, we talk to people who, often really stress themselves out about like, is one day going to set me back or, I'm afraid to have this thing. Is this, I'm off track, all this stuff. So I think it's a well intentioned message that a lot of people need to hear. But like we keep saying, there's somewhere in the middle. Michaela, one of the last things I wanted to ask you about today, you mentioned how your husband is incredibly supportive, which is great. But as we both know, that's not always the case. We both worked with a lot of women who are kind of on a bit of a solo journey when it comes to this stuff. What thoughts or recommendations would you have on that? When you have a client who comes to you and says, like, my husband, my partner, they're not on the same page. It's kind of difficult for me. I feel like I have to do my own thing here. What suggestions would you have for that person?
This is so tough, and it's unfortunately so common. I see this a lot. And I think one of the biggest things is being open with your spouse and voicing the reason of why you want to do the things that you're doing, and like why you need the time for yourself to go get a workout in, or why you want to eat better meals as a family. And I think that just coming from a place of like sharing it that way can help them understand a little more. I think as women especially, some of us have been trying to diet on and off our whole lives, and so part of it is like maybe the husbands are a little bit like, what are you doing this time? And it is so unfortunate that that is the case. But I think that when you come at it from a place of like, hey, honey, like this is really important to me, and it would help me if you could do this, this, and this. And you're not going to change them. So you have to get past that. When Funny story actually is when I first started dating my now husband, I came in too hot. I was a new trainer and I was excited. I wanted to share everything that I was learning. And he was like, be my girlfriend, not my trainer, not my nutrition coach. Get out of here. And he wouldn't work out with me because I was annoying. I was too much. I was trying to, and my husband is he's come a long way even because, you do start to rub off on them in a good way. And now there's a lot of things that he pushes me to do, like family walks every night. A lot of times, by the end of the day, I'm like, I'm more up to like want to pass on it. And he's like, let's go, we're going. And it's just it's a thing that we do now. But that wasn't always the case. There were for a couple of years, I would go out for walks every day by myself. And then eventually he started coming. And then now like he gets just as excited as I do. And so I think like it can organically grow that way, but definitely voicing it. And then the other piece of it is like finding a community that is supportive. That's why I've fallen in love with the group coaching program, is because you are surrounded by more people that get it, or even having a coach and getting some external accountability, because you do feel a little less alone when you're on a health and fitness journey. It is just a hard reality that not everybody around you is going to be doing the same thing. And you're going to be making a lot of different decisions and choices than them a lot of the time. And that's okay, right? Because you're the only person at the end of the day that lives with the choices that you make. And so it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing, but it does make it hard and harder to make those decisions yourself. So, yeah, having, supportive, whether it is a friend or you join a community or you have a coach, like it can just help you feel a little bit less alone in your journey.
Sure, those are some great suggestions. And I do like how you also sprinkled in, hey, like you can do all these things, but be aware that there are times where you just have to do your own thing. You have different goals than the people around you, which require different decisions to be made. I was actually just talking to a client about this who is hosting her partner's family for the next week and change. And they, like many people, they just don't share her goals, and that's fine. So I just told her up front, hey, the on paper goal right now is fat loss. These people don't have fat loss goals, which is fine. So if that's the outcome that you want to see over this next 1 to 2 weeks, there will be multiple scenarios where you're the only person making at least a somewhat different decision. I'm not saying to leave the room and go eat a rice cake by yourself. It's not like we're saying anything extreme, but maybe you are passing on a drink when nobody else is. Maybe you are getting up before everybody else in the weekend to make sure that you get your steps in. So yes, getting support, asking for support as much as you can to make it a little bit easier, but also embracing, there are times this is just going to be solo, because if you have goals like these, statistically speaking, you will often be in the minority. So, it is what it
Yeah.
is. So yeah, kind of
And
buckling up
being
for that.
confident in your decision making too, because like I said, you're the only one that lives with those choices that you make. And when you have goals, it's very easy to be influenced by others around you. I think to like my late 20s when um, I I moved from Massachusetts to Minnesota when I was 23 years old. And so I spent most of my 20s here. And I was it was a weird time because you're trying to like make friends and what do friends want to do? They're like, let's go to the bar, let's go out to eat, let's go do this. But then I also was really getting into health and fitness and having goals and wanting to improve my body composition. And so it was like, gosh, how do I balance all of this? And a lot of times I fell into those first couple of years, a lot of peer pressure because I'd have this game plan and then I'd get to all of my friends and there was no plans to drink or whatever. But then everyone's like, come on. Like, and you're like, oh. And part of it was I felt uncomfortable to stand my ground because I didn't want to make them feel uncomfortable. And I hear this a lot from clients is like, well, I didn't want to say no and not eat it too. I didn't want to make them feel uncomfortable. And yeah, I mean that's a whole other thing that we could get into. But what I've learned over the years is that like people they begin to respect your decision. I used to have like pushy friends, but the more that I stood my ground, the more that they just started to respect that no means no. And there was many times where, for a whole hour of the first time we were together, they're trying to get me to drink this or do that. And like, if I didn't want it, I don't want it. If when I do, I do. And I think that that's really important is just owning it because you can kind of take away from some of that, like, I don't know, icky feeling of like, oh, I don't want to say no to them. We feel a lot of pressure from food all the time. Somebody made this for you. But like, if you don't want something or it's not supportive of your goals, you can say no and it's okay. And it is very uncomfortable, but it gets easier the more that you do it.
For sure, especially because, like you said, people over time begin to realize, all right, that's not somebody I'm going to waste my time kind of pressuring. And sometimes I think people pressure with good intentions. It's more like, I want to make sure you're having a good time. And this is the way that I feel like that has to happen. But I think when you tell those pressurers, like, hey, I'm all set with what I have, I'll let you know if I want some more. It's like, okay, like it's more like, hey, I want to make sure you're having a good time. Of course, the other element of it is when people do feel insecure about their own decisions, they're projecting on you. That's a rabbit hole that we can save for another day.
Right. But
Micheala, before,
sometimes you
go ahead.
you no, I was gonna say sometimes you
Yeah.
like inspire people to do it too. When our nanny first came to our house, I was just doing my own thing, and so I'd come out for lunch and I'd use my food scale and I'm weighing things out, and I'd see her looking at me, and I'm like, oh gosh, she's totally judging me right now, and then like probably took her a couple of days or a week, and then she's like, do you weigh everything? And I'm like, oh yeah, sometimes I do, and I just kept it short, but I just explained what I was doing. And then like the next day she was like, can you show me what you're doing? And and then she wanted to do it. And it was just funny because it was like, I know that years ago, I probably would have not pulled out my food scale because I would have been like, someone's in my house. I don't want them to see what I'm doing. And now I'm just like, yeah, I use my food scale. Even when I'm not tracking, I love to use my food scale. And yeah, I taught her how to do it. And she's always very interested in all of that. So sometimes you can inspire people too.
For sure, for sure. And also, so like you, I've moved a lot. As well, you had the big move in your 20s, right? From Massachusetts
Yeah.
to Minnesota. And I've had a lot of similar experiences moving to new cities, trying to connect with new people. And obviously the default is almost always let's get drinks or let's go out to eat. But like you're mentioning with this food scale thing, I do find that a lot of people are interested in alternatives. They're just not necessarily going to be the ones to think of that or suggest that. So something I'll do often here in Buenos Aires, where I'm living now, is suggest that we just get coffee and go on a walk. And
Mhm.
people are always down for that. It's just not like a thing that people think of very often because the default is pretty much always let's get drinks, let's do a happy hour, let's go out to eat. And that stuff's fine, but it can't be the only social card that you're turning. So if you reroute people, often people are okay with that.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. So true.
Micheala, the last thing I have for you today is what I call the fast four. So, four
Oh,
questions that have nothing to do with health and fitness, just whatever the first thing to come to mind is.
cool.
All right, first one. And I actually switched these questions up recently. So, I think you'll be the first guest to get at least two or three of these. So, first
Ooh.
one, if you had to give a 10-minute TED talk on something that is not health and fitness related, what topic could you confidently speak on?
Oh gosh. Oh my gosh. Um, 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 Health and fitness consumes my life. No, I'm just kidding. I'm like, I always talk about this.
Yeah.
I would probably talk about high rocks. That's my just. Oh wait, is that health and fitness? That's
That
fitness.
100% that's
Shoot,
health and fitness.
shoot. Okay, that's my like. passion right now. Um, does motherhood count? Can I talk about motherhood?
Absolutely, you can. Yeah.
Okay, I would talk about like postpartum and motherhood.
Okay. Great answer. Second
That's
question
still
for
health
you,
and fitness. I'm
Michaela.
sorry.
No, no, it's okay. Again, you're the first person I've asked that, so I'm curious what the responses will be. What is your go-to comfort movie or TV show?
Love Dancing with the Stars. It's not like a comfort necessarily, but I don't watch a lot of TV. I know this is kind of weird, but I just don't. I go to bed very early, and that's like typically when people watch TV, I feel like. So I hate that question because I'd never watch anything. But I do love Dancing with the Stars, and I stay up every season that it's on. I stay up till, 9:30 to watch it. So that's my go-to.
Stay up till 9:30.
Or
So,
or
yeah.
I would say like the old like I like some of the old series that I don't know, were big. Like I loved like Gossip Girl and things. My husband thinks I'm crazy because I would like rewatch like some of those series and he's like, "How many times have you seen this?" But yeah, those are the things I
Yeah.
watch.
I mean, I'm rewatching The Office right now. I'm not like a
Yeah.
hardcore Office fan, but it's just like a very mindless, almost like easy listening with music. I think it's like an easy watch where it's just super light, 20 minutes, and then no, I'm with you. If you could teleport anywhere in the world right now, where would you go?
I would go to Italy. My
Okay.
grandparents live in
That's
Italy.
okay. I was gonna say I
And
remember you having like a tie there.
yeah, my grandparents moved there. Well, my grandmother's from there, but we still have family there. And so she moved back with her family and my grandfather too. And we visited them. But I would love to take my son there. So that's kind of a goal that we have. But I loved Italy so much.
And whereabouts in Italy?
They live in Lucca, which is like right outside of Florence.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So, and we traveled kind of all around. We spent some time with them and then we traveled around. So I'd love to do that again.
Amazing. I've never been to Italy. I've thought about it in the past because actually there's a tattoo artist that I really like his work who happens to be based there. So I would not be surprised if I go out there for tattoos at some point and then just explore a bit after that. Last question for you, Michaela. What are you most grateful for right now?
I'm grateful for good health and my family. Honestly, I love being a mom and I think that it's just made my days so much happier and I'm more intentional and purposeful and so I love growing a family.
It's a beautiful answer. Michaela, if
Thank you.
people want to learn more about you, if they want to learn more about how you might be able to help them, where should we send them?
Yeah, you can follow me on Instagram. It's at Micheala Stommes. It's quite the mouthful, but maybe we can leave it in the show notes or something.
Of
The
course.
spelling, it's like people will be searching for me forever. And then our website too, embodymovement.co. But yeah, mostly Instagram is where I hang out.
Great. Okay. Well, I will definitely include the links to both of those in the show notes. And I really do appreciate you coming today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.